I don't think Breath of the Wild should have won Game of the Year. Okay, hear me out. I'm gonna give you some context to this conclusion I have reached. When the Nintendo Switch was first announced, I hadn't planned on pre-ordering it, so as more cool shit and hype built up towards its release, I realized that I would likely end up getting it anyway. So, like the dumb fuck teenager I am, I paid an additional $100 on top of the $300 price tag to a scalper to get the console less than a month after release. I got a copy of Breath of the Wild from GameStop shortly after getting the console. So, here I was with this brand new piece of tech and a brand new game I'd collectively spent $460 on. Of course I loved it. The Switch was something so different from all the other consoles and video game experiences I had ever had. I sunk many hours into Breath of the Wild, but after about 2 months of playtime, I abandoned the game almost entirely. Despite this sudden drop off in interest when the Game of the Year awards rolled around, I voted for Breath of the Wild. Out of the nominees, PUBG, Persona 5, Horizon Zero Dawn, Super Mario Odyssey, and Breath of the Wild, I'd only played Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, and PUBG. And while PUBG was revolutionary and cool, it certainly didn't deserve a Game of the Year nomination. While Mario Odyssey was also cool, I stopped playing it once I beat the story in about 15 hours. It's definitely not a bad game, it just didn't have as strong as an impact as Breath of the Wild did. So when Breath of the Wild won, I was satisfied with that. Fast forward another 6 months or so, a family member asked me to watch her dogs for a weekend, and that meant I had to be away from my baby.
Excuse you?
So I figured, hey, I'll bring my PS4, it's compact, and I can buy some new games for cheap. One of the many games I snagged was Horizon Zero Dawn, the complete edition, for just $20. And with a price like that, I wasn't prepared for the masterpiece I had just purchased. Horizon Zero Dawn is just amazing. Like, a genuine masterpiece. There's very little about this game that I have a problem with. Horizon Zero Dawn is so visually stunning that I feel bad even trying to compare it to Breath of the Wild. When I played Breath of the Wild, I thought the cell shading and art style was unique, and it looked pretty good for a weaker console, computing-wise. But after playing Horizon Zero Dawn, going back to almost any game is depressing. And not only are the graphics gorgeous because of the raw amount of detail in the environment, but the color palette is so vibrant that over the course of many hours of playing, my breath was taken away by just how beautiful everything around me was. Add in this amazing lighting engine and you have a game that is visually never dull. As for character design, the game is just strong. I can make a whole video talking about how amazingly diverse this game is, both in sexuality, gender, skin color, and basic character design. The whole style of the game is so different and cool. All the different tribes have different styles and they're all distinguishable. There are more than 25 enemies, all with their own weak spots and important elemental weaknesses. Some of them are so elaborate and immense that fighting them feels like a genuine spectacle. I want to compare the enemies from Horizon Zero Dawn to Breath of the Wild's enemies. To me, there's almost no competition. In Breath of the Wild, save for a few ones with specific gimmicks or one-time fights, almost all of them are just hit it enough and it will die reasonably quickly. Because of this, there isn't much variation in the combat. You approach a bokoblin as you do a Keese, you pick one off or swing at a whole crowd. You approach a Choo-Choo as you do a Lizalfos, you brute force it while dodging elemental attacks. You approach a Hinox as you do a Stone Talus, you aim for the weak point to knock it down and attack while it's stunned. It's the same basic concept over and over, with a touch of variation sprinkled in by blights. But you only fight 4 blights in one run of the game, and considering one run could last dozens of hours and these fights generally last 15 to 10 minutes, there's so much bland combat that you have to fight through just to keep progressing. And the worst part is that there isn't any variation in weapons either. You have heavy, two-handed weapons that do more damage and attack slower, and you have one-handed weapons that you can have a shield with. Bows all act the same, save for the few that shoot several arrows, but that's about it. And the powers you get from the champions are pretty cool, or they would be if they weren't tacked to cooldowns that are unavoidable. You can use Urbosa's Fury, my favorite ability, a total of 3 times before you need to wait 12 whole minutes before using it again. Not to mention, if you have Urbosa's Fury off cooldown, you can't use charge attacks without automatically using the ability. So if you're fighting a group of weak bokoblins who just want to twirl through all of them, you can't without wasting this super powerful move. What a poor design choice. Make it equipable, or a trigger, or anything except automatic. Let's talk about weapons a little bit more. There's 0 weapon customization. Actually, there's basically 0 customization at all. You can change armor type, color, and strength through material upgrades, but that's basically it. And I get that Breath of the Wild is technically not an RPG, but it's meant to be an expansive open world exploration game, so you want to give people tools to complete the story and make it feel like their own. And while I'll say Breath of the Wild does provide a good physics engine and fun abilities to toy with, actually killing enemies with them is a lot more effort than just beating them down with your highest damage weapon. Now, I want to look at combat in Horizon Zero Dawn. Aloy has 4 base weapon types to start off with: the bow, the spear, the tripcaster, and the ropecaster. All 4 do fundamentally different things, and there are subcategories that all do different types of damage and have different ranges. As the game progresses, you are introduced to more powerful weapon subcategories and whole new weapon types, like the sling, the tear blaster, and the rattler. Then the DLC adds 2 more entirely different weapon types into the game. All these different weapon types and subcategories can be enhanced even further with modification coils that increase certain stats. Also, I almost forgot to mention, in the heat of battle, some enemies can be stripped of their powerful heavy weapons, allowing you to pick them up and deal massive damage for a short amount of time. Although natural increased weapon strength is a concept done mostly in RPGs, Breath of the Wild does this to some degree as well. They have a similar unspoken progression system where completing missions and gaining experience over time makes it so the weapons that are available to you happen to be stronger. However, unlike Horizon Zero Dawn, which introduces stronger varieties in weapon types, in Breath of the Wild, the only thing that changes is the number of the skin on the weapon, meaning you'll be playing exactly the same. You'll just pack a bit more of a punch. In all the old Zelda games, you usually only had a set kit of only a few weapons and abilities, but those were so good. Well, as every single person who praises this game says, Breath of the Wild is a fresh take on The Legend of Zelda. It is so different from what Zelda was that the few things it keeps in common with the older games make Breath of the Wild worse. Breath of the Wild is meant to be an open world game that you sink hours upon hours into, but when you make the ways you benefit from exploring so bland and repetitive, you have a weak open world. Whatever, this video is all over the place because I can't stop fucking rambling, but I want to talk about the progression systems more. I think the biggest reason why Breath of the Wild technically isn't an RPG is because of the lack of a progression system and a skill tree, something most traditional RPGs have. But there is a form of progression, spoken and unspoken, because as time goes on you find tougher enemies more frequently that drop better weapons. You're also adding to your pool of hearts and stamina as you complete dungeons. So there is a form of character progression. And honestly, I think it's a lousy form. Once you get over 10 hearts, you generally have some pretty decent armor at that point too, so the sense of danger is minimal. You can take massive hits, and the way you heal only adds to this. I'm not a whole fan of the whole you can pause time and instantly regain your life thing. That, with the obtaining of hearts and better armor, makes the sense of risk and difficulty in Breath of the Wild very minimal after playing for about 10 to 12 hours. On the other hand, there's Horizon Zero Dawn, where in the first 15 minutes of the game they explain to you that even the weakest of machines can take down a careless hunter.
Even a weak machine can kill a hunter if she's careless.
And they mean it. If you're too dumb, too reckless, or decide to just rush into a fight not properly equipped, you're going to get trampled no matter where you are in the game. There are potions that do instantly heal you, but you can't pause time in a menu and must take them in the heat of battle. Once those potions run out, you're left with a consume over time heal. As you continue to unlock new abilities in the skill tree and get better weapons and coils, you do find yourself getting stronger, but at the end of the day, you are just a fleshy human fighting against machines made of metal. All of the machines move differently and have different attack patterns, so you almost always have to perform some reconnaissance before jumping into a fight. The simple scan mechanic makes this easy. It also almost always gives you the option to be stealthy or avoid the fight entirely. Although this freedom of choice is partially presented in Breath of the Wild, the stealth in that game is pretty abysmal, and if you run in the opposite direction for 20 seconds, the enemies basically just give up on you. But why even bother running away? The enemies are all pretty weak to begin with, unless you're out of weapons or overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But why even fight? The combat isn't especially satisfying or interesting. It's like a vicious cycle once you hit mid to late game in Breath of the Wild. I don't know. I don't feel like Breath of the Wild is really a challenge. I get that it's meant to be a game for all ages, but I think it suffers because of it. I'm also not a fan of thinking adding difficulty is removing parts of the HUD. Difficulty is throwing more complex enemies at you, meaning you'll need to use actual skills and strategy. Things like Naughty Dog's difficulty scaling get this right, and while I won't say that Horizon Zero Dawn is as difficult as Uncharted's Crushing, it's still a game with inherent challenge and skill needed, skill that you cultivate over playtime and learning the many weapons and playstyles. Going back and playing Breath of the Wild in preparation for this video, I was bored. I feel like there's so little to do that isn't the same task over and over to get materials for farming upgrades. I'm also like 100% that person that could turn off her brain and farm for literally hours. I used to do that in Warframe all the time, and I used to do that in Breath of the Wild to get all the stone taluses and shit. But I feel like that's what I spend the majority of my time doing, just roaming around looking for specific enemy types to get specific parts, like killing stone taluses for gems, over and over and over again. And don't get me wrong, in Horizon Zero Dawn you constantly farm, but the game provides you with several opportunities to fight higher tier enemies during story missions, so you don't need to keep fighting to get the several parts that you need. I don't think I can stress enough how amazing the combat in Horizon Zero Dawn is. Every single fight requires concentration and precision. You can't just stumble through these things. It's a level of difficulty matched by something like Dark Souls. Well, obviously easier than Dark Souls, but still holding that component of the next enemy could fuck me up if I underestimate it vibe. Once you meet all the mini bosses in Breath of the Wild, you know all four of them? 3 of them? Yeah, I guess 3 of them. No, 4 of them. Yeah, it's probably 4 of them. You learn their very easy weaknesses and all the risks in the game is gone. It sucks because the initial meeting of these enemies is stunning. I still remember how horrified I was the first time I met a stone talus. I only had 4 hearts and hardly any armor. The thing one-shot me, but now I do 30-minute play sessions where I defeat every stone talus on the map just for the gems. That's the thing about Breath of the Wild. When I first played it, I thought it was amazing because there was no initial glaring flaws. It was polished as all hell, and it was such a fresh take on Zelda. First area where they just throw you into the game with all the basics, that was a really good tutorial as far as tutorials go, but playing it again feels like a chore. That's what happens when the thing you're seeing over and over again no longer poses a challenge. It doesn't feel like a game anymore, it feels like I'm doing chores. When I think of Breath of the Wild, the phrase "a mile wide but an inch deep" comes to mind. Other than finding shrines and Korok seeds, I have no drive to just run around and explore the map because it's all pretty samey and empty. And that really sucks because Breath of the Wild's greatest strength is the ability to explore every single inch of the map, but it feels like it's squandered. Despite being utterly seamless with no invisible walls to be found, you can go anywhere at any time, but there's no reason to. While I think the idea of Korok seeds is very fun and I adore little challenges integrated into the world, Horizon Zero Dawn has many of these little figures and metal flowers to collect, but other than the collectibles and shrines, why bother exploring? Once you get over 15 hearts and fill your stamina meter, you don't need to get shrines anymore. It's not like you even need that many hearts anyways. Technically you can beat the final boss with only 3, but all the shrines are very surface level and dull when you've completed them in the past. Not to mention, some of them are fucking unbearable. So if you don't need to do shrines, you don't need to do towers, you don't need to fight the blights, then why even bother doing it at all? First playing Breath of the Wild was an amazing experience, and you will never see me waver on that. Everything feels fresh and different because there's no game exactly like Breath of the Wild. Once you've beaten Breath of the Wild, I cannot find a reason to go back. With the freshness gone, everything tastes stale. I would say that people would go back for the story if not for the fact that Breath of the Wild hardly has one. The Zelda games aren't exactly storytelling masterpieces. In fact, they're pretty surface level the same. When you play a Zelda game, there are boxes being ticked off when it comes to the story. While this doesn't have to be inherently a bad thing, I personally think that the story suffers because of it. And because the story is so simple, the characters are just as flat. They're essentially walking stereotypes with almost no backstories. They're just strong, chosen warriors that died hundreds of years ago to Ganon's minions. Who else do you have? Impa? Paya? The lab people? I honestly do not remember their names. What can you tell me about them besides maybe one personality trait in their appearance? Not very much, and that's because that's how much is there. If this game wasn't a world-famous brand, no one would latch on to these characters, except maybe for their appearance, which is often the best part about them. Their designs are super cool and memorable, if only their actual character was too. Now I want to compare the story in Breath of the Wild to Horizon Zero Dawn's story. Horizon Zero Dawn's story is fucking insane, bro. The world and the lore are so fucking rich. They give you pages upon pages of extra backstory and hours of voice logs to listen to if you want. And never before had I felt compelled to actually read or listen to every single word before playing this game. The best part, you don't need to read through all of this to understand what's going on. The story is still amazingly written without the extra. It's a constantly twisting and turning road with several plot twists that caught me off guard. And this is only made better by the stellar voice acting. Like, there are these little voice log collectibles scattered across the map about this one guy from before the apocalypse and his struggle with drug use and his dying mother, and that shit made me cry just because of how well it was acted and written. And that was just the subplot. There are several instances during the main plot where I was on the edge of my seat and straight up crying. I don't want to spoil the story for you, but damn, this shit is like a 10 out of 10. And actually, speaking of ratings, here are mine for Breath of the Wild and Horizon Zero Dawn. After playing both of these games extensively and drawing my own conclusions, I can't help but wonder how in the world did Breath of the Wild win Game of the Year? Well, I have a theory. I don't want to kill myself. It's obviously just a theory, though. I mean, like, let's be real, it's all fucking speculation. These games were released within a month of each other, with Horizon Zero Dawn being released slightly earlier. However, Breath of the Wild sold about 500,000 copies more than Horizon Zero Dawn. The answer to why that is pretty obvious. Breath of the Wild was not only the launch title for the newest Nintendo console, it was also a continuation of one of the most famous and oldest gaming franchises in the world. Horizon Zero Dawn was a brand new IP for the PlayStation 4. Despite this, Horizon Zero Dawn did go on to be the highest selling new IP for Sony, but it's hard to compete with this series of games that started in 1986. Not to mention the fact that the Switch and Breath of the Wild were marketed as games for everyone, where Horizon Zero Dawn was marketed toward teenagers and adults. Couple that with playing on a brand new console and a game with great first-time presentation, you're going to get a nomination for Game of the Year. I don't know. This is obviously just my opinion, and I still haven't even played Persona 5. Hey, maybe I'll play that and think it's better than Horizon Zero Dawn and Breath of the Wild. But until then, I regret not voting for Horizon Zero Dawn because it absolutely deserved Game of the Year. And hey, my name is StarlightSam.